Hey everyone, welcome to Reality TV News Update, the place where we bring you the latest updates, fun moments, and behind-the-scenes stories you won't want to miss. The first siren cut through the quiet street just after sunrise. Neighbors would later say the sound felt unreal, as if it belonged to a movie scene rather than their peaceful neighborhood. Within minutes, flashing lights washed over the walls of the Pearl residence. By the time most people woke up, Vince Pearl and Ava Pearl were already surrounded by police officers, facing the most shocking moment of their lives. Only days earlier, their names had been everywhere, for all the wrong reasons. A lawsuit for $1.5 million had been filed against them in a civil court, and rumors spread fast across social media. Fans and followers debated what was real and what was exaggerated. Some believed it was only another online scandal that would fade in a week. None of them expected it to turn into a real arrest that would shake the entire city. Inside the house, Vince stood frozen in the hallway, wearing the same clothes he had fallen asleep in. Ava sat on the edge of the bed, shaking as her phone kept buzzing with messages she did not dare to open. The knock on the door was heavy and final. There was no mistaking what it meant. Their lawyer had warned them that this moment could come, yet they still hoped it would not happen so quickly. When the door opened, police officers stepped inside with firm voices and steady hands. They announced the charges and the civil claim connected to the lawsuit. Vince tried to speak, but his words fell apart before they reached his lips. Ava covered her mouth as if that could stop the reality from entering her body. The officers informed them that they were both being taken into custody for further questioning. Outside, cameras had already started to gather. Someone had tipped off the media, and now the quiet sidewalk was packed with flashing shutters and shouted questions. Vince and Ava were escorted out separately, with their hands restrained in front of them. The cold morning air hit their faces, and for the first time, the weight of the situation struck with full force. Just a week earlier, they had been posting smiling photos from a luxury event where they were the center of attention. They had spoken about new projects, big plans, and a future that seemed unstoppable. Now they stood in front of police cars as alleged defendants in a lawsuit that threatened to destroy everything they had built. The lawsuit itself claimed that Vince and Ava had been involved in a financial scheme that left several investors facing massive losses. According to the court filing, the total damages amounted to $1.5 million. The document alleges deception, broken promises, and misuse of funds that were originally meant for a business expansion. Vince had denied the claims online, calling them false and damaging. Ava had remained mostly silent, except for one brief post saying the truth would come out. But the arrest changed everything. As the police vehicles pulled away, neighbors stood silently behind yellow tape, whispering to one another in disbelief. Some had known Vince and Ava for years. They described them as polite, ambitious, and generous. Others admitted they had always felt something was off, beneath the carefully crafted image. Now every past interaction felt suspicious in hindsight. At the police station, Vince and Ava were separated for questioning. The bright lights of the interview room reflected off the cold metal table. Vince sat alone, staring at his hands as if he barely recognized them. His mind raced through every decision that had led to this moment. Every deal, every risk, every shortcut he had convinced himself was harmless. In the next room, Ava struggled to keep her composure. Her voice trembled as she answered questions about accounts, transactions, and meetings. She insisted that she had trusted Vince and believed everything they did was legal. At moments, her anger broke through the fear and she demanded to know who had turned on them and why now. Hours passed. Outside the station, reporters continued to gather, turning the street into a storm of speculation. Hashtags began trending across platforms, and the public divided and decides within minutes. Supporters claimed the couple was being targeted. Critics demanded accountability and justice for those who had lost money. Behind closed doors, the reality was far more complicated than either side imagined. Detectives reviewed documents, bank records, and communications that painted a tangled picture of ambition, pressure, and mistakes. There were signatures that raised questions, transfers that could not be easily explained, and meetings that were never disclosed to investors. Each new discovery tightened the knot around Vince and Ava. Late in the afternoon, they were finally brought together again in a holding area. The sight of one another stirred a wave of emotion. For the first time since the arrest, they were able to speak freely, if only in low whispers. Vince apologized again and again, though he could not even fully describe what he was apologizing for. Ava listened with eyes filled with tears and unanswered questions. She asked him if any of it was true. He hesitated just long enough for the silence to speak louder than any confession. That pause changed something between them. As night fell, they were processed and prepared for temporary detention pending further legal steps. The reality of being locked behind a door struck harder than any headline. The echo of the cell closing was a sound neither of them would ever forget. In separate cells, they faced the longest night of their lives. Vince lay on the narrow bench, staring at the ceiling, replaying every argument, every late-night meeting, every warning sign he had ignored. He thought about his family, his reputation, and the future that now felt like it had vanished. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine what prison might look like if things went wrong. That thought made his chest tighten. Ava sat with her back against the wall, pulling her knees toward her chest. The silence in the cell was heavy and unforgiving. She thought of her parents who had always believed in her. She thought of the fans who had supported her career. She thought of how fragile trust truly is, and how easily it can crumble in a single moment. Neither of them slept. By morning, the story had exploded across international media. Headlines screamed their names alongside the figure $1.5 million. Commentators debated guilt and innocence as if it were a game. Online detectives pulled apart every old video and post, searching for hidden clues that had always been there but were never noticed. Lawyers on both sides prepared for a legal battle that promised to be long and brutal. Vince and Ava were brought before a judge later that day. The courtroom was packed with observers, press, and a few quiet family members who sat with tense expressions. The charges were read aloud in a steady voice that echoed through the room. Each word felt like a strike against their future. The judge ordered continued detention while further investigation proceeded. Bail was discussed but not immediately granted. As the gavel fell, Ava felt her legs weaken. Vince lowered his head, knowing that this was only the beginning. In the days that followed, new details emerged almost daily. More investors came forward with statements describing broken promises and missed payments. Former business partners distanced themselves, offering carefully worded comments that neither confirmed nor denied what had happened. The image of Vince and Ava shifted rapidly from success story to cautionary tale. Yet through all the noise, one question remained unanswered. How did it all reach this point? Some insiders suggested that pressure had pushed Vince towards riskier decisions. Rapid growth had created expectations that were impossible to maintain without cutting corners. Ava, according to those same sources, had trusted him with most of the financial structure while she focused on public relations and branding. Whether that trust was blind or informed would soon become a central issue in court. Behind bars, the couple lived in two separate worlds of regret, fear, and uncertainty. Their only contact with the outside world came through brief legal visits and carefully monitored phone calls. Every conversation carried the weight of what was at stake. Vince began to realize that silence would no longer protect him. Ava began to realize that trust would not save her. Weeks passed, and the case grew larger. The $1.5 million lawsuit expanded as investigators examined whether additional claims might follow. What had once been a single civil action now threatened to become a much wider legal storm. Public opinion continued to swing wildly. Some fans organized campaigns demanding fair treatment and due process. Others shared their own financial struggles and expressed anger at the idea that wealthy figures might escape consequences. Through it all, Vince and Ava were no longer celebrities, or entrepreneurs, or public figures. They were simply two people caught in the slow, relentless machinery of the legal system. One evening, during a brief shared moment in a hallway under supervision, Ava looked at Vince and asked a single question. Was it worth it? Vince did not answer right away. His eyes were tired and older than they had been weeks earlier. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely louder than a breath. He said he did not know anymore. That uncertainty was perhaps the most honest thing either of them had said since the beginning of the crisis. The road ahead remains long and filled with unknowns. The lawsuit still stands at $1.5 million, though additional claims may yet arise. The investigation continues with no clear end in sight. Careers, reputations, and relationships hang in the balance.
What once looked like an untouchable success story has now become a lesson watched by millions. A reminder that behind every headline lie real people, real fear, and consequences that cannot be edited or erased. As Vince and Ava Pearl remain in custody awaiting the next chapter of their case, the world watches and waits. Some hope for redemption. Others expect downfall. Both outcomes remain possible as the truth slowly unfolds, step by step, in a courtroom far from the bright lights that once defined their lives. For now, only one thing is certain. Nothing will ever be the same
Before everything
again.
collapsed felt ordinary. Vince Pearl sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through messages, while Ava Pearl prepared tea in silence. They spoke about schedules and upcoming plans as if the world outside their walls was calm and predictable. None of them said the words they were both secretly thinking. The lawsuit for $1.5 million was already filed, and their lawyer had warned them to stay alert. Fear lingered in the air, thick and quiet. Just before sunrise, the silence was broken by lights flashing through the windows. The sound of sirens echoed across the street and stopped directly in front of the house. The moment stretched heavy and unreal. The knock on the door was sharp and final. There was no room for denial and no space left to hide. Police entered with controlled movements and steady voices. They announced that Vince and Ava were being taken into custody related to the active investigation connected to the lawsuit. Ava froze where she stood, and Vince dropped his phone as the weight of the words crushed him instantly. In seconds, everything they had built felt like it had shattered. Outside, neighbors stood frozen as patrol cars filled the quiet street. Cameras arrived almost instantly, as if the world had been waiting for this moment. Vince was guided out first, with his hands restrained and his face pale with shock. Ava followed moments later with tears traveling silently down her cheeks. Flashing lights reflected in her eyes as reporters shouted questions she could not answer. Only a week earlier, they had shared bright smiles at a public event, surrounded by praise and attention. They had spoken boldly about success and growth and endless possibilities. Now they were escorted into police vehicles as their names exploded across the internet in waves of shock and speculation. At the station, they were separated for questioning. Vince sat under harsh lights, staring at the metal table in front of him. The room felt cold in a way that went far beyond temperature. Each question forced him to confront decisions he had avoided examining too closely. Each answer felt like it pulled him deeper into a reality he could no longer deny. In another room, Ava fought to keep her voice steady. She explained her role as clearly as she could. She described contracts she trusted and numbers she believed were accurate. Yet doubt crept into her words as she realized how much she truly did not know. The belief that love and partnership were enough to protect her began to crack. Outside the station, crowds grew larger by the hour. Social media turned their arrest into a spectacle. Some people defended them fiercely, claiming they were victims of betrayal. Others demanded justice and repayment for every person who had lost money. The lawsuit for $1.5 million became the center of every debate. As the hours passed, investigators reviewed financial records and communications. Patterns emerged that could not be ignored. Transactions raised difficult questions, and timelines began to shift. What once looked like ordinary business now appeared layered and complex and dangerous. When Vince and Ava saw each other again, it was in a narrow hallway under supervision. The sight of one another after hours of isolation stirred pain and guilt. Vince tried to speak, but his words faltered. Ava looked at him, searching for certainty that no longer existed between them. The silence said more than any argument ever could. They were placed into holding cells that evening. The doors closed with a sound that echoed through their chests. In that moment, they were no longer public figures or business partners. They were simply two people facing consequences they never believed would reach this point. Vince lay awake, staring into darkness, reliving every risk he had taken. He remembered warnings that he had dismissed and shortcuts he had justified. He told himself that success demanded sacrifice and speed. Now he wondered if the true cost was far higher than anything he had imagined. Ava sat with her back against the wall, holding her arms close to her body. Her thoughts moved in relentless circles. She wondered when trust had turned into blindness. She wondered how long danger had been standing beside her unnoticed. She wondered what her parents would think when they saw her face on every screen. Morning brought no relief. News of their detention dominated headlines. Commentators spoke with certainty about guilt and innocence, though the truth had yet to be fully revealed. Analysts dissected their past statements and videos, searching for signs that had been hidden in plain sight. Friends became distant, and business partners went silent. Later that day, they stood in court for the first time. Family members watched with helpless expressions. The charges were read aloud in slow, steady words that echoed through the packed room. The figure of $1.5 million seemed to hang in the air like a shadow over every breath they took. The judge ordered continued detention pending further investigation. Bail was discussed, but not immediately resolved. Ava closed her eyes as the ruling was delivered. Vince lowered his head as if accepting a reality he had spent years running from. Days passed into weeks. More details surfaced. Additional investors stepped forward with written statements. Each new claim felt like another weight added to a structure already strained beyond its limits. The legal storm only grew stronger. Inside detention, time moved differently. Conversations became rare and precious. Each moment with legal counsel carried urgency and fear. Vince began to understand that silence might no longer protect him. Ava began to understand that loyalty might not be enough to save her. Public opinion continued to divide. Some called for patience and fairness. Others called for punishment and restitution. Their story became a lesson debated endlessly online. People spoke about ambition and greed and trust and collapse as if those words could explain everything. One evening, Ava was escorted briefly past Vince in a corridor. Under watchful eyes, she asked him a single question. Was any of it true? Vince hesitated. His answer never fully formed. His hesitation alone reshaped the way she saw everything. That moment lingered between them long after the doors closed again. The lawsuit still stands at $1.5 million. The investigation continues without a clear end in sight. What once appeared as a perfect partnership now appears fragile and divided by doubt. As Vince and Ava remain in custody, they face futures they cannot yet define. Redemption is still a possibility. So is lasting downfall. The road ahead is uncertain and unforgiving. What is certain is that the image they once controlled is gone forever. Their story now belongs to the courtrooms and the headlines and the countless strangers who watch from a distance. And in the quiet of their separate cells, one truth remains impossible to escape. Nothing will ever return to the way it was.